Hello, my name is Joanna Barratt and I'm here to read the final chapter in my book Learning from Life. It's one of a trilogy and there'll be another one following. We're still in the Sermon on the Mount and this particular chapter is dealing with the light of the body. All the light the body has, it gets from the eye. The eye is crucial and powerful, enabling all direction and movement. We don't walk backwards, we move in the direction of our eye. The eyes are drawn to light. Even with our eyes closed, we can tell when a room is plunged into darkness or a light is switched on. Spiritually, we're also drawn towards spiritual light, towards revelation, towards enlightenment. It may be a false light, but everyone is in some sort of light. What gets into the heart gets there through the eyes. Whoever looks on a woman to lust after her, the eye and the heart are inextricably linked. If we want to guard our heart, our eye is the key. A single eye means pure, unmixed, not double-minded. The single eye, like the pure heart, only sees good. In Titus 1:15, it says, "To the pure, all things are pure." In all circumstances, even in trials and problems, the single eye sees only God at work, not the devil. If we know that God is in charge, we need never blame the devil for what happens to us. Because in Romans chapter 8, verse 20, it says, "All things work together for good to them that love God." We see things in the light of that scripture. We see things in a different light. What we allow into our heart will become a part of us, subconscious, rooted in our hidden desires and motives. But with our mind, we determine what we will allow in and what we will turn our eyes towards. I've entitled my section, my chapter of this book, "There's no smoke without fire." Have you ever heard that expression? Well, do you believe it? Is there any possible way that you can get smoke without fire? This quotation is regularly used when someone has been accused of doing something which they adamantly deny. If enough stink is created, then people will believe the worst, whether it's truth or libel. And I personally have no regard for this statement at all, especially after witnessing firsthand an experience of smoke without fire. Some years ago, my husband Morris had this grand idea to knock down the ceiling which divided the attic from the first floor rooms. The house we live in is over 150 years old, so he was prepared for a little muck and dust. He made sure that all the rooms which housed expensive recording equipment and computers were securely sealed with masking tape around the door edges and under the doors. And then he, together with a couple of his big bruiser buddies, they wielded their sledgehammers as they undertook the demolition work. Now, Barratt Ministries is situated right next door to a private hospital. We'd already warned them that there could be some dust coming from our upstairs windows and suggested that it might be wise for them to close the windows of their premises which overlooked our house. But we hadn't anticipated the centuries worth of dust, looking exactly like smoke, to come billowing from the open windows for all the neighbourhood to see. And the amount of dust was unbelievable, so unbelievable that the hospital receptionist immediately rang for the fire brigade as she was convinced our house was on fire. Well, sure enough, 3 fire engines pulled into our drive and firemen rushed into our courtyard and up the scaffolding that were erected outside, ready to burst into the blazing rooms with their hoses. Horrified at the catastrophe which could truly have taken place if they'd managed to do what they intended, Morris, who could only be identified by his heightened voice as his face, other than the whites of his eyes, were completely black, he intervened. He pleaded with them not to break the seals on the doors, and he tried his best to convince these men that this was not smoke from a fire, but fine dust. Well, it took Morris what seemed ages for these men to at least give his story some credibility, because they were trained to believe that there was no smoke without fire. The fire chief went to the sealed doors and he felt all around the edges for signs of heat. And with great reluctance, he declined from smashing through the doors to see with his own eyes that there was no danger. Morris really had to plead and grovel for this man to give way because the responsibility was his. But after the chief had looked at the work in progress and the state of the workers, he left the premises peacefully. You know, I'm really grateful for that experience because now I firmly believe that in many cases there really is smoke without fire. We're often so ready to judge by appearances but have no real understanding of a situation. And I personally have been in that place where people have believed for years something about me, even though it was a lie. One particular instance of this was where a mother and her 2 daughters were very angry at me for something they said I'd spoken from a church platform during a meeting which took place years and years back. When they faced me up with the accusation some years ago, I thought at the time it was pretty unreasonable what they were charging me with because I just couldn't imagine myself saying it. But because 3 people had been adamant, I decided to ring up the man who used to record all the church meetings and asked if he had a copy of that particular service that they were referring to. Well, sure enough, he had a copy and said he'd mail it to me. I listened through and found that their accusation had been totally unfounded, and I let them listen to the tape for themselves. I must admit, though, that I had not anticipated what they would say after they'd heard it for themselves. One of the daughters told me that she had edited tapes herself and removed or included things, so she felt sure that I'd done the same. Even though I assured her that she could ring the man who kept the master tapes for herself, she wanted to remain convinced of her grievance against me, which proved to me that some people just don't want to see the truth and prefer their grudges to the truth. This incident which I experienced is not isolated. I know that many people's reputations have been greatly tarnished and sometimes completely killed because someone got the wrong end of the stick or became jealous and stubbornly refused to gain a clear understanding of a situation. I can vividly recall a man who was mightily used by God in Holland to build up a great evangelistic organisation which incorporated a block of offices with around 50 full-time workers and churches in 13 different Dutch cities. His fame was spread throughout Holland as, due to his zeal to reach the lost, he was also relaying weekly programmes of his church services on cable television, which he knew were being viewed by prostitutes and others with real agonising problems who would not have openly gone to church. This man really and truly had a heart for the lost and spent his life working for God relentlessly in this way. He also had 2 orphanages, one in India and the other in Indonesia. He trained up men around him to take care of the churches and orphanages and met with them on a daily basis to keep them in mind of his vision. But the inevitable happened, and one of the men who had worked with him for over 30 years and had a really close relationship with him rose up against him and caused a tremendous split, taking over half the congregations and working away to follow his own particular vision. Not only was he bent on pulling people away, but he began a smear campaign and spread despicable rumours concerning this man's sexual and financial dealings. The whole organisation was plunged into turmoil and confusion as the cancer spread through it. But did it stop there? Because this man was so well known, the government got involved and they took out what's called a black book against him and made a thorough investigation of all the allegations and accusations which had been brought against him. This investigation went on for quite some time, and interviews were even reported on the national TV channels. To some Dutch people, he was famous. To others, he was infamous. But one thing was sure, everyone was aware of this man and his work for God. At the end of the investigation, he was publicly cleared, which was a tremendous relief to everyone who had pledged their allegiance to him and stayed. But to others, it didn't make a blind bit of difference. As far as they were concerned, he was still guilty, and they were even more angry and bitter now that his name had been nationally cleared. As for the man himself, he didn't have a bad word to say of any of his enemies. In fact, on one occasion, when he was waiting in his car for the traffic lights to change, to turn green, he began to laugh as a thought he'd had tickled him. The family members in his car asked why he laughed, and he said to them, "Do you realise just how many churches we've started in Holland?" Referring to all the different offshoots of the work due to the splits. What a wonderful attitude this man had. He really did take literally the scripture that says all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. And he could see through God's eyes the positive side of this terrible incident. A short time later, the man passed into the presence of the Lord. But the intriguing thing about his death was that the members of his own congregation were informed, not from the church platform, but via the major national television networks when they reported it in their news programmes. The church building could not contain those who wanted to pay their last respects to him. And the traffic in The Hague was stopped as the funeral procession, escorted by the police, made their way to the graveside. What a tremendous testimony and witness to the nation this man had been during his life and even in his death. It's very sad that there's so much evil speaking and gossip in the church. The very place where we have the Bible as our textbook, which gives us clear guidance as to how we should handle these situations. Sadly, going to church doesn't make a person a Christian, any more than living in a garage would make a person a car. But those who would follow Christ and seek to do his will should close their ears to gossip and slander and rebuke the offenders for passing on their undesired information, because what comes in through our ears has a frightening way of plummeting deep into our hearts and remaining there, only to permanently affect our manner towards those we've heard things about. And that goes for our eyes too. I've been amazed at how stained and blotted my mind can become after a short visit to the dentist. Sometimes I've picked up a magazine from the table because of a headline on the front page catching my eye. But after flicking through the magazine to get to the article which had first attracted me, I've been amazed at the smut and filth which has managed to become everyday public reading for all and sundry, when at one time such literature would have been regarded as suitable material for the Playboy and other such magazines. And all I'd looked at was the once innocent and wholesome woman, or woman's own. I'm not talking about She or Cosmopolitan. I'm very thankful also that I never had a television to bombard myself with, or my incredibly impressionable children with all kinds of ideas. I don't know how TV-owning parents cope at Christmas with all the adverts telling the kids that they can't live without certain things. Parents think nothing of spending £100 on a computer game these days, quite apart from the brand name clothing and trainers, which are also a must. I was shocked to see how turned on to Lucozade my two boys, who were then aged 8 and 5, were after seeing Lara Croft glaring at them from the advertising hoardings as they travelled to and from school each day. And they didn't even particularly like the taste of the stuff. The pressure we allow ourselves to be under because we willingly soak up all we're exposed to is amazing. And the only escape is to live for the future kingdom and not for this world. If you want to know more of what I'm talking about here, you'll have to get your hands on a copy of the book Manifesto for a Revolution, written by Alex Robertson, which we've published. Get your mind off what you see with your physical eyes and hear with your physical ears, and look to the future, which should actually be the only reality for a true Christian. God bless you.